Vendetta gives us our first ever Fury and Calm legend with Akali, the rogue assassin. If you want to learn how to shuriken flip your way to victory and how to build this deck, this is the video for you. This is First 40.
Fear the assassin with no master.
Akali Rogue Assassin has action. If it is your turn, move a friendly unit in a showdown to base, and if I'm empowered, ready it. Costs 3 energy and a power to ready her. So Akali is very good at moving things in and out, and you see that a lot with her chosen champions in Akali Silent and Akali Deadly Weapon, both of which having movement-based abilities. Silent, when she moves to a battlefield, she gets stronger, she gains might, and Deadly Weapon will ping a unit, deal some damage to a unit when it moves in or out of a battlefield. This is all wrapped up in a bow with Shuriken Flip, the signature spell, which is going to allow you to deal some damage to a unit at a battlefield and then move a friendly unit. So continuing with those movement-based effects, which really leads into the strength of this character. The strengths are going to be that immense amount of movement-based value. This is something that you'll see throughout a lot of Akali decks where they'll play around things like Stellacorn Herder. If you thought Aurelia was bad with drawing a bunch of cards from Stellacorn Herder, Akali can do it just as frequently, if not better, and without spending too many resources. You can always move it in, and you tap Akali to move it back, draw 2 cards. Yes, it doesn't advance board state, but it is going to give you a lot of resources. This gets even better when you empower the legend, and it's not just Stella, it can be Jhin. There's a lot of other cards that we'll talk about in this video. She also has very powerful offense. I think historically green has been known kind of as a hold color. Some of its offense hasn't been there, and it's really relied on discipline and on guard, which are just +2 pumps. But being combined with Fury finally does give a lot more offensive threat, as Fury is a very offensive color, and so you can be able to swing in for pretty high might totals. Akali also has very unique attack patterns because of her ability to send something in, sniff out any combat tricks, and then bring it home from Akali, or even drop an ambush unit on top. She ends up being kind of difficult to play around when you're the defender, and I think that is a big advantage of Akali. Meanwhile, some of the disadvantages or weaknesses of Akali are her low might ceiling. While we did talk about the fact that Fury allows you to get some additional pumps outside of your normal discipline and on guard, Akali, because she ends up drawing a lot of resources off of things like Stellacorn, and she just kind of has these lower cost cards that she wants to play around a lot of instead of one big card, a lot of the decks tend to lean towards capping out at 4 drops and therefore having a relatively low ceiling of might that she can push over the top with. Often it's going to be 4 might on defense as the cap, while her offensive might ceiling is going to be a little bit higher. This also kind of goes into the next weakness, is that she's kind of not the best at holding, which is a bit strange for a green deck, but no stranger for red decks, which kind of shows where the color pie is starting to lean, at least early on, for Akali. So while she is pretty strong on offense with things like Akali Silent getting that +2 when it moves in, on defense she's often capping out at a 4, especially because in this version that I'm bringing to you today, it will be around some assault units as well, which are significantly weaker on defense. So let's jump on into the deck and talk a little bit about my first 40 for Akali. This is just my initial takes, and I think it's just supposed to serve as a way for you to think about how you might want to build Akali in the future. So to kick things off, let's go with the battlefields that I have as a whole. The blind battlefield I would take for this is going to be the Star Spring. This is going to give you extra ways to generate more value from Stellacorn or Jhin or any of your other movement-based effects, as you can drop a small unit on top of the Star Spring to move it out and protect it if it was going to hold, or you can even use it to pivot if the unit is ready via something like Reveler, or even just start of turn you actually do get to confirm a hold. For going second, I like Akali Bar. Using your mobility and turning it into might is quite valuable, and it's a really good go second battlefield because your opponent is unlikely to really get much value out of Akali Bar. So I think either as a blind or a go second, this can work. If you don't like Star Spring, I think Akali Bar can be your blind, and if you really do like Star Spring, then keep it as is and play Akali Bar as your go second. With going first, I think Targon's Peak is nice, being able to get on the board early, conquer it, and have resources up for On Guard, Discipline, Longsword, these kind of cheap combat tricks that cost exactly 2 runes. Targon's Peak synergizes quite well with, and Akali is going to be Conquer focused, so Targon's Peak ends up being really nice. With that, let's jump into some of the core cards of the list. I've brought them up a few times, but some of the movement-based cards that we're talking about, the Akali, Silent, Jhin Murderous Artist, and Stellacorn Herder. These are kind of the core 3 pieces of how you're going to be leveraging Akali's legend ability to gain value from movement. So with the Stellacorn Herder, of course, this is obvious. This is your draw engine, and it's actually the main reason that the deck is a relatively low curve. Because Stellacorn Herder is going to give you so many resources via Akali, you really want the ability to actually utilize those cards in hand before the game ends. And so we want to play a low curve that's a little bit more aggressive. With that being said, we also play some amount of higher power costs, and Jhin is going to be a great way to not only use the extra cards you have in hand, but use that extra power to cast things like your Falling Star, to equip your long swords. There's a lot of really good value that you get from this, and also ganking can still be a valuable keyword, especially if something like a Twilight Reveler is going to be able to give the Murderous Artist ready. Akali Silent is a great chosen champion. You can develop it and tap out when you do so because it can't be targeted, and then you can utilize the move to battlefield effect to create some very large attacks, and especially so once you've been able to empower your legend, you can, send an Akali Silent, give her the +2, bounce her back, ready her, move her in again, and you're swinging for 8, which is really difficult for people to hold against. Now, we talked about how the might ceiling can be a little bit rough for this list, and one of the ways that you can start to get around that are via gear. So the next little suite of cards I want to talk about are Mask of Foresight, Longsword, and Steric's Gauge. This is kind of twofold in combating some of the weaknesses that I found with the deck, which are the lower might ceiling, as well as being very low on might on defense. Because gear are going to stick around instead of the temporary buffs like Akali Silent, things like Steric's Gauge and Longsword can really help you hold. And the way that Akali's attack patterns work, you're often swinging with a single unit first. So Mask of Foresight is always going to trigger, and then you may drop an ambusher on top or something of that nature, and then Mask of Foresight can still help you on defense. Mask of Foresight's one that I've not been entirely sold on 100%, but I do think it's a really cool place to start, and you will get some very solid value out of it, especially post-Akali empowerment. So I think that just these additional might combat tricks can really give you a lot of value where you need it, which is just in the might department for not only looking for aggressive trades on offense, but then converting that positive trade in the ability to defend and potentially get a hold. I think this is a deck where if you can confirm holds, you're going to be way ahead because offensively she's very strong. The next thing I want to talk about is just the deck as a whole. I want to jump into the big picture and kind of briefly go over some of these additional card choices. The 2-drop suite, I think Inferna is relatively self-explanatory in the fact that you get to send units in, you can always bring them back with Akali, and you can drop the ambush unit on top first. So you can kind of use like a Scuttle Crab that you played early, run it in, drop Inferna, and then bring the Scuttle Crab back, which is really strong. I also think Scuttle Crab is just powerful for this because the hand information is really helpful when you're playing around these attacks and combat tricks, knowing when you can take combat, when you can even look to try and confirm a hold. It also is going to draw you deeper to try and get towards your Stellacorn and your Jhin and your other powerful movement-based effects that the deck is heavily built around. Meanwhile, Mournful Witness, I really just enjoy as a 2-for-4. Very commonly, you just get to make it a 2-for-4. You either use a Discipline, a Mask of Foresight, and On Guard offensively, and then it gets to hold for much higher than it should in the early game, or you can just send it in, drop a Rengar or an Inferna, and bounce the Witness back. It is going to end up getting that +2 at the end of combat, and now you just have more value on the board for a very cheap cost. So really valuable card in that way. The next little bit of cards are going to be your ambushers. I keep bringing it up, but I think a relative good play pattern that you're going to go through a lot with Akali is going to be swing in a unit, drop an ambusher, back out the initial unit. And Rengar is, of course, a great way to do so. It's a 5-might attacker. Inferna is just a cheap way to still get that same value, especially in the early game. The last one that kind of has a similar pattern to that, but not exactly, is going to be your Twilight Reveler. This is the when I attack, ready another friendly unit. So you can basically play a bigger unit, like for instance, your Akali Silent, send in the Reveler to attack, and then bring it back after readying your Akali Silent, and then you can swing the bigger unit in to take a Conquer. The last few kind of bits here are Charm and Falling Star as your potential removal. Charm is really nice with Silent. You kind of get this massive buff of damage for might for the turn when you attack in, and then you can charm something on the back line, and this can protect your Silent proactively because she's going to have so much might on that turn. You kill off their back row, and then they can't contest her on the next turn, so you get the ability to hold and back off with your most powerful unit. Falling Star is going to give a similar idea, and it's a lot more castable because you have Jhin. When you don't have Jhin, it can be a little bit difficult, but it is just another way to protect your units that are a little bit more fragile on defense by proactively killing their back row. Shuriken Flip is kind of that last piece of mobility. We talked about this in the intro on like, this is another way to leverage the mobility. You already are moving things around, but this is your quote unquote ride the wind. But you have to remember that this is slow speed. And because it has flow, felt like 2 copies was probably enough because you're going to be able to play it from your trash later on. Notably for Shuriken Flip, though, that does help it feel really good to play is it does say deal to up to 1 enemy unit at a battlefield, then move a friendly unit, which means you actually don't need to have an enemy unit at a battlefield to use the movement effect, which is really important for these types of abilities to be strong, especially when you're looking to score the winning point at the end of the game. And of course, the green staples, Disciple, On Guard, Defy, you kind of want these in basically any green deck that's going to be combat focused. On Guard is the exception, but I feel here with how many cards you can draw off Stellacorn Herder, On Guard is just very high value, especially when you're playing around single units. Now it's time for the maybe board. I want to talk a little bit about some cards that didn't make this first 40, but I wanted you to maybe think about or consider, or hear. These are my hear me outs for Akali. But basically, I am looking at maybe attack synergistic decks a little bit more. We have a lot of move effects already, but on attack can also be really threatening. Especially when we get to the point that you can move things back and then go back in with an empowered Akali. So I was looking at Yasuo Remorseful and Akali Deadly Weapon. These are both, when I attack triggers. Well, okay. Yasuo is a when I attack trigger. Deadly Weapon is a when I move trigger. But Yasuo says when I attack, deal damage equal to my might to an enemy unit here. So if your opponent stacks multiple units, you can go in, hit it, move him back, and then potentially re-ready him, send him in, and clear away very large boards. Akali Deadly Weapon, once she's empowered, she's going to be dealing 2 every time she pings in, which can be really valuable when you're pushing in and out. It just takes a while to set up her empowerment, as well as your Legends empowerment, so I think that was my main struggle with it. But I also wanted to note, Pendulum Blade as a way when you're going to be moving in and out of battlefields that you can get even more value. Once Akali is empowered, this is going to be able to give you +4 per turn on attacks onto your unit. And even just baseline, it is a 3 energy gear with a very standard equip cost that is basically a +3. So it's on rate, and then your Akali Legend can make it more. It's just bad defensively, which is where I wanted to kind of bring up Emperor's Divide as another thing that maybe this deck could do. We talk about how it struggles defensively, but it's very good at attacking. And Emperor's Divide is just another way that you can protect these units that are not so good offensively. It also will synergize with all of the move triggers that we have in the deck, your Stellacorns, your Jins, to potentially get even more value. You can either hide it and protect your units defensively that way, or you can play it for pivots, or you can just play it at action speed. So it's a really flexible card that I think probably could find its way, especially as like a 1 of, maybe a 2 of into the deck. I just didn't have room for it in the first 40, but I think you should mess around with Emperor's Divide. Now, the rest of the maybe board are, some more standards, some even crazier hear me outs. The first one being Perfect Execution. I think this card is just good. I think it's probably like almost incorrect to ever have like a red deck that doesn't play one copy of this. With the flow cost, you basically just get to do this effect twice. It's a little bit it's not even under rate. It's like on rate at 3 and a power. It's like if you think about cleave, which is 1 energy, and you think about readying a unit, which is like upstage comedy, which is 2 energy, you're just paying an additional power for that effect, but then you get to recur it with flow. So this card is just like very good, and for any of these aggressive decks, whether you're pivoting, whatever, this is just like very valuable. And it can work with some of the other cards I have in the maybe board, but also just kind of works with what you're already generically doing. Another one that I think could be just worth playing. She's just very good. She's a little boring, but Aurelia Fervent does actually work quite well with Rogue Assassin. You know, she'll ready at the start of turn. She'll be a 5. You'll send her in. You'll bounce her back with Akali. Choosing her, she becomes a 6. You ready her with Akali because, assumedly, you've empowered her. She's a 7. She's just going to be a lot bigger of an attacker, and she's going to get value out of your buffs really efficiently. Just a good green card. I just had to include it. Another boring one is Pharaoh's Forerunner. It doesn't exactly fit what this deck wants to be doing with moving in and out, but it does shore up your weakness on defense. When you get into positions where you can win offensively and then just jam a Forerunner, it can enable you to always have units at home to leverage your ambushers, leverage your weapons, leverage your buffs. It's quite good. Kaisa, another kind of similar concept. It's more about the fact that you want to keep drawing cards. So Stellacorn Herder often does that because you can move her back, but when Stellacorn actually conquers, she ends up just being really vulnerable, whereas Kaisa Survivor does have a slightly better might breakpoint at 4. I'm not convinced, but this is maybe a card that you should always kind of consider within your red decks, and I think Akali is no exception. Now, for a little bit more spiciness, my last two, Azir Ascendant, was already had like 3 copies of gear in this list, and I actually think the gear have felt generally good. The longswords, the Sterix gauge, and then you're playing infinite move effects. So I think Azir Ascendant actually has a world where he can be really valuable. He moves to location. He's gonna like allow you to have a Stellacorn conquer on 1 turn. You slam Azir, and then when your opponent tries to swing in, they can't swing a small unit into Stellacorn because you can always swap the Azir Ascendant in. So they're basically having to swing above like a 7 or even more if you have gear on the board to get around this Azir, and then he's drawing you a card when you go for the action. So I think there's like a very real possibility that Azir Ascendant is good. This is just a very expensive card, and Akali has often, in my mind, liked to play on a low cost curve. So this is just more of like well, can we play a higher cost curve Akali? What does that look like? How can we make that work? And I think Azir Ascendant could look really good in that spot. Now, the spiciest I have saved for last. It's probably bad, but it's interesting. Forgotten Signpost. This is action. Exhaust a unit you control to tap this. Move a different unit you control to the location of the unit you exhausted to pay for this ability. So, what does that work practically in Akali? I talked about how you don't really want to defend that often. Defending is kind of rough, and you have all these move triggers. You also have cards in your 2-drop slot like Scuttle Crab or any of your other 2-drops that you've maybe saved earlier when you used an ambush unit and you moved it back and then you lost the ambush unit, but you have this 2-drop hanging around. You can then use that 2-drop that you have banked to be an escape valve forever for the units that you're using that are way better offensively, while also giving yourself move triggers. You're also getting additional draws from Stellacorn, you're getting additional energy and power from Jhin. To set it up, it's probably a little bit too difficult, but I wanted to include it as like, hey, somebody try this and get back to me. Try Forgotten Signpost, see if you can figure it out, because I think that this is the deck that would maybe make this work at some way, shape, or form. It also has really cute synergy with Reveler, Twilight Reveler, because she's gonna ready units, and then if you can't actually use that readying for anything important, you can actually use that readied unit to allow you to Forgotten Signpost something elsewhere. So I don't know. Cinema, Forgotten Signpost. It sounds really, really fun. Let me know if this is something that you have tried or you like, because this is a kind of a pet card idea. But with that being said, we have one of the most technically fun League of Legends champions with Akali. So many like cool mechanics in League, and they've brought over that like mobility and kind of like assassin nature of that deck to the game. So I tried to build a deck that would fit in that kind of playstyle. Let me know if this deck is something similar to what you've done, if it works for you, or if you have any different ideas. Maybe that gear-centric or more mobility-heavy on-attack trigger deck is something you've worked on. Let me know about that in the comments down below. But if not, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, sub to the channel, and I'll see you on the next First 40.